Hi, everyone. Welcome to Unit8 Talks. I hope you're enjoying your afternoon. This is Unit8 team. My name is Kamil Zalewski, and I'll be hosting today's webinar. For those of you who are joining Unit8 Talks for the first time, it's our webinar series on data and AI topics, with a lot of, let's say, emphasis on real-life examples from the Swiss market. With Unit8, with a Lausanne-based data analytics and AI services company, with the goal to actually bring data science, advanced analytics, machine learning to a lot of the non-digital native industries. The topic of today is actually AI in chemistry, and we're going to be going through some of the industry trends, some of the real-life examples. And our presenters for today are Andreas Blum, our lead and head of our consulting practice, and Julian Hedson, our lead data scientist with some special skills in the applying data science to the chemical space. With that, let's kick off the session. And I just wanted to remind everyone, this session is for you, so please feel free to leverage the question and answers tab, ask the questions. We're here to answer any of the questions that you might have. And as usual, this session is recorded. It's going to be posted next week on our YouTube channel. With that, enjoy the session. Andreas, Julien, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. We're very happy to have so many participants today. I'm joining you from Zurich today, where one of our offices is. It's a beautiful sunny day. Julien, how is the situation in Lausanne?
It's actually very good as well, and should be nice for the weekend too, I think.
Okay, perfect. And the weekend is almost there. So let's jump right in. What is our agenda for today? First of all, we'd like to give you an overview about AI applications in chemistry. What are the kind of categories of use cases that you can expect? Then for the second chapter, we'll jump right into some of the real use cases which we implemented with some of our clients. We cannot disclose the client names, but we can give a bit of an overview of the work that we did for them. And then we go to some challenges that current AI practitioners are facing in the chemistry industry, and also give our view on best practices that we learned in our past 50 plus projects on AI, and we'll leave some time for Q&A. So just a very brief intro on us as Unit8. As Camille mentioned, we focus on providing AI and data services, and essentially want to support our customers in turning data into value. In that respect, we're a one-stop shop for solving all kinds of business problems that can be solved with data. And that includes data engineering, infrastructure advisory, and also data and AI advisory more on the strategic side. We've been around for 3 years, and we have offices in Lausanne, where our headquarters is, and in Zurich and in Krakow, Poland. And in fact, pharma and chemicals is one of our focus industries, but we're also active across a range of other industries, as you can see at the bottom, with a focus a bit on the not digitally native industries. So now I'd like to give you an overview of AI in manufacturing, and in particular in chemistry. In a way, you can think of AI as being present in every part of the value chain. So you can really think of AI optimization potentials ranging from R&D at the very beginning of the value chain up to sales and marketing at the end of the value chain. And if you imagine that you only improve a small issue in each of these components, it really compounds across the whole value chain, and you can reach big benefits. And of course, all of this depends on a solid data infrastructure with good data availability and quality. Now, if we jump into the chemicals industry, there really are 4 categories of use cases where AI is typically applied. You see them here. Again, if we start at the beginning of the value chain, it would be R&D. AI is used with product development, and we will come to that also later, even virtual testing, prototyping. Then if you move on to production, it's really a huge field. Predictive maintenance is a very big topic there, that you predict problems before they occur. So then say you can clean a sensor before the sensor is defective. And in that way, you can reduce downtime and increase efficiency, save costs. Within sales and distribution, there's very large application areas in terms of forecasting. If you can predict how many sales you're going to have on a product level, on a regional level, it helps you to steer your sales force better, also to manage your inventories better. And then also the environment and safety domain is becoming more and more important. It's now possible with AI to steer plants more efficiently, so you can reduce emissions by essentially having a smart energy management installed in your plants. Also, monitoring of production sites is possible, that maybe not human workers need to go even to very dangerous sites, but some drones or sensors could help with that remote monitoring. So this is just a broad overview of the, let's say, 4 dominant categories of use cases. And with that, I'd like to jump right into our first real use case, which is within R&D drug development. And Julien will give you some insights on that.
Yes, thanks, Andreas. So yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit about drug development, because this is maybe, I think today, the most canonical example of where AI and machine learning in particular can have a huge impact in practice. So basically, if we look at drug development today, this is a very hard and expensive endeavor. It lasts many years. It costs in the billions of dollars, and it fails quite often at various stages during the drug development. So typically, a drug, finding a good drug means finding a good molecule, and the number of possible molecules is absolutely huge. It's one of these numbers that is hard to imagine because it's so huge. So the whole challenge is to basically find the needle in the haystack there and really find a good molecule, or perhaps even the best molecule, hopefully, that will be efficient against a certain disease. And it works in stages, and basically the very first stage there on the left is to try to consist in trying to do some drug discovery, so discover a few of these molecules that could be potentially efficient. And this is where machine learning can help the most. The following stages are more, machine learning, I think, could also help in parts of there, but it's a little bit less active at least today. It's more about testing and making sure that this molecule, in addition to being efficient on the disease, also doesn't kill people, for example. But the potential impact of this is really big. So imagine we come with better algorithms that find better molecules at the beginning. It makes the whole process more likely to succeed if we can predict, for example, which molecules are safe, right? And also, obviously, will reduce the duration and reduce the budget. So you can go to next slide. So basically, the challenges there, as I said, is that the number of possible molecules that look like drugs is really, really huge. And the problem has many facets. So when we develop a new drug, we want to find something that is effective against the disease, but also edible, soluble. People, have to be able to eat it without side effects, and so on, right? And there, very, very broadly speaking, on a very high level, there are sort of two approaches for using machine learning here in this domain. One is to basically use machine learning at each step. So when we try to screen or when we try to do, for example, synthesis of molecules, and help us at each step to predict what's going to work, what's not going to work. So it's perhaps a bit more what we could call the predictive approach. So, you know, for a given target, for a given candidate molecule, we would try to predict if it works or not. And the other approach is more to do the whole thing end to end. So we just basically tell the model, look, I'm interested in curing this disease, please help me. And I'll just later present a little bit these two approaches. So you can go to the next slide. So yeah, basically a drug, like I said, is a molecule, and a molecule is a sort of discrete structure. So, you know, it's basically a bunch of atoms and their bonds. I'm simplifying a little bit, of course, but in terms of in computer science terms, this is discrete structure. There is a good news here because we can represent that using a string, which is called a SMILE string, which means we can represent these molecules a little bit like text, you know. So, for example, here you have an example where this molecule is, you know, written like N1CCN, etc., which is specifying this molecule. So that's a good news for, you know, basically machine learning practitioners, because it means that all these great models that we have, you know, developed over the last few years and that work so well on text, they can also be used on molecules, at least with this representation. There are also other ways. For example, you can also use graph machine learning. This is also quite promising on molecules. So if you switch to next slide, I will show, I want to talk a little bit about this basically filtering approach. So here, this is the first approach I was mentioning before. So the way it works usually is that, you know, once the target protein has been identified, that the molecule, you know, that we're looking for should act on, basically usually there is high throughput physical screening. So lots of these molecules are synthesized and tested in cells, and we look if there is some activity of this molecule on the protein. And if there is, it counts as a lead, but still there are many leads, like tens of thousands of leads or more. So we still have to know, you know, which leads are good. For example, for the other criteria that come down the chain. For example, which ones are safe, which ones are edible, soluble, and so on. So here, one approach is to have predictive machine learning models which predict this, you know, these attributes. And for example, if a drug is unlikely to be safe, well, that's valuable input for the chemist, because it means the chemist can, you know, either go back and try to find a similar molecule but a little bit different, or maybe we can try to simply, you know, extend the list of molecules that are being screened. And the other approach on the next slide, this is more the end-to-end approach. So if you want here, in a sense, this is the holy grail. This is a little bit the holy grail of what we're looking for. So basically here, you can see a machine learning model that we would train, and in input, it would receive what we're looking for. So, you know, here we specify, okay, we want the model to work on this target. We want the molecule to work on this target. We want it to be safe, edible, easy to synthesize. So it should be, you know, basically possible to make it. And then the model would actually directly output promising candidates molecules, right? Maybe not spot on every time, but the hope is that this model could produce good candidates, right? And there is some work in this direction. So there is a paper, for example, that I'm citing here on this deck, where you can see on the left, they have a molecule that they start with, and then they ask the model to incrementally optimize it to make it better, right? So here they are optimizing two metrics. One is called QED. It's quantifying how much does it look like in terms of how drug-like does it look, so how good does it look in terms of looking like a drug. And SAS is something they want to minimize. It means how complex is it to synthesize, basically. And you can see, if you compare the start with the finish, you can see that the QED increases a lot and the SAS decreases a lot. And this is just a machine learning model proposing these new molecules. So I think this is really, really super promising approaches, and it's the future of drug discovery, I think. So here the gains are really, so speed is one thing, likelihood of success, so also, which means reducing the costs, is another thing. But also I think really we can increase the quality of the drugs and the molecules that we find, because the models are able to explore vastly more combinations, if you want, or they are able to grasp the space of huge dimensionality, which is very tough to do manually for chemists, right? It's tough and it's time consuming. So here, just to throw some keywords there, so deep learning is really used in this domain, and it's a mix of generative models and optimization that is usually used. Now, if we go to the next slide, so here I want to depart a little bit from molecules and say, okay, now how can we figure out how to best assemble? So assume we have a bunch of chemicals, and we want to find best ways to assemble them into mixtures, so doing chemical formulation. So this has lots of applications. For example, in food recipes, that's an obvious one, flavors, fragrances, but also paints, or also drugs. When once you have found the active molecule, you still have to find everything that goes around, and you have to find basically a good formulation for that. And every time there is a common difficulty to all of these problems, is that, again, a little bit like for the case of molecule, the search space is really, really huge, right? So if you have several thousands of chemicals at your disposal, it's really tough to find the best way to combine them so that you obtain the product that you want at the end, right? So this is a little bit the core problem that machine learning can try to help with for formulation. So you can go to the next slide. Here too, we can break it down a little bit in two approaches. So the first approach is to, again, train models that predict, for example, how good a certain formulation is. So if we take the example of a food recipe, we could ask the model to predict what will be the taste of the chocolate cake, for example, right? And other properties like maybe stability, perhaps price. Price maybe is a silly example because we can usually just compute it by looking at the recipe, but I think probably you get the idea, right? And then by giving this feedback to the person designing the recipe, we can hopefully, allow faster iterations, and instead of cooking the cake every time, you can just get quicker feedback and iterate faster. So the main gain here is speed, basically. And now if we go to the other way, this is the equivalent of the end-to-end way that we had also for molecules. So here we would ask the model, okay, here is what I want. I want an inexpensive chocolate cake, and here the model would basically propose a new recipe of a chocolate cake. So that would be the output of the model. The model wouldn't try to really predict something for a recipe, but rather predict a new recipe, right? So this is also, in a sense, it's more challenging to achieve, but it can be done in some contexts. We know that for sure it can be done. And again, it allows to not only be faster and increase the quality of outcomes, but really also explore combinations of chemicals that there are just too many of them to explore for a human to do that manually. So the algorithm can sort of do it for you. And here too, it's a mix of deep learning, generative models, and optimizations that are usually used for these sort of things. And here, I just want to say a word. If you go to switch to the next slide about these generative models, because this is something that has been used a lot in the domain of images. So here you can see the output of some of these generative models over time. Each of the photo that you see here is a fake person. So these persons don't exist. These photos are completely synthetic. And you can see that these models are really good at capturing some very complex patterns sometimes, things like the expression, the symmetry of the face, the complexity of the hair, and so on. You can go on this website, thispersondoesnotexist.com, and you can generate examples yourself if you want to try. And basically, this is the same sort of techniques and approaches that we can try using for other domains, like, for example, molecules in chemistry. So with that, I think now we want to talk a little bit more about some real use cases, a little bit more down to earth. And this was really what we saw was really, let's say, the core of chemistry. Now we also want to talk a little bit more about what goes around, right? So I will give the mic back to Andreas.
Exactly. So now we have a use case that is concerned with the improvement in operating equipment efficiency, and that actually means, if you imagine a factory, that's the fully productive time of your operating equipment. So it's a key manufacturing KPI. And typically this OEE can go down for 3 reasons. One is simply a loss in availability because some part of the plant stops. It's a loss in performance, which means, yeah, either it's going at limited speed, or you have some kind of unnecessary breaks, or you have a loss in quality, which then means defects or a reduction in yield. And in fact, now with advanced analytics and data, you can zoom into each of these root causes that cause your OEE to drop. And for example, once you're able to predict stops in equipment, you might be able to prevent it. When you're able to understand what's causing the idle time, you can suggest improvements. And we actually had a very specific use case where we applied these principles. And that's actually the case of a production line optimization that we conducted for a global pharmaceutical company and for one of their Swiss operations. And it was a case of tablet production. So just imagine, I don't know, maybe your painkillers that you're taking, simple white pressed tablets. So in fact, that pharma company was running out of production capacity, and building a new plant would have been very costly and would have taken a lot of time. So they decided to focus on increasing their production capacity with the existing equipment. And they hired us as Unit8 to come in and assess their plant and identify these efficiency improvements. And in fact, we integrated data from several sources and sensors in the plant, which were then aggregated on a AWS platform on the cloud. And we could come up with a variety of improvement measures. And I'll just give you a quick overview. For example, one of the process steps, which was the pressing of the tablets, that was identified as a bottleneck. And therefore, we could add a very limited number of equipment to that pressing step to eliminate that bottleneck. A second example would be that, in fact, one of the process steps was quality checks, which took a quite long time. And we could, in fact, improve the quality of the input parameters for the production so that the tablets had a higher quality, so we could reduce the number of quality checks and therefore increase the production speed. And also, we did a benchmarking of different production lines. So they had 4 production lines in the plant, and we benchmarked all of them and then could then identify that one line was faster than the others. in certain steps, and then we could extract these best practices. And I think in summary, all of these measures combined, in fact, resulted in very large business benefits for the client. Here we're talking about a 7 to 11% productivity increase. And in fact, the client earned a 15 times return on invest. So the gains were more than 15 times as much as they kind of had to pay to us as the consultants. And they had annualized savings of 50 million francs in consequence. And we actually have more examples in production, also a case in predictive maintenance.
So I can take this one. So here, this is the example of a chemical producer. So they have a big factory actually here in Switzerland. And the problem that they had is that this factory is big and complex, basically, but they were noticing that sometimes the production was slowing down for issues that were not always very easy to detect. And after a little bit of investigation, so we saw that most of it was caused by some valves that were supposed to pour a certain amount of products, which their quality was deteriorating over time. The problem is that they have thousands of valves, and it's really tough to manually look for the ones that are a little bit not working properly, basically. So here, what we did is first we built real-time monitoring capabilities for the factory, where factory workers can always see the KPIs of the factory, but also we built some anomaly detection algorithms for monitoring these valves. And it's relatively simple behind the scenes, but it's able to already point to the valves that are most likely to cause problems, right? And by doing that, they were able to clean the right valves, and basically just knowing which of the valves to clean. And this helped a lot. So it increased the throughput of the factory by roughly 8% in this case. Now we have other use cases that we can also talk about that are a little bit less related to manufacturing, more to sales, distributions, and logistics. So here, this one is an example for a flavor producer. So here, the challenge that they have is that they have some shortages in ingredients. So for example, there is a new virus strain that is killing certain kinds of oranges in Spain, for example, so they have to change the sort of oranges that they use. The problem is that all of the ingredients contain slightly different content. So they have basically different sort of ingredients that with content that varies over time, right? So here we built sort of a homemade algorithm for them that is able to find on demand new formulations, new flavors that have the same content, but that can be made out of arbitrary different ingredients. And this also allows them to gradually become more sustainable, because they can this way they can favor ingredients that have high sustainability score. So they can say, okay, please, preferentially put these ingredients in the formulas. Also, the price can be taken into account there. So, for example, you can say, I want a formula that is slightly cheaper. Other use case, this time a little bit more linked to logistics and also supply chain. So here, this is about forecasting, which we also did for a chemical company. And here, really, the idea is to automate what was previously done manually. So before, in order to forecast the orders that they would have for each product, they would ask each subdivision to do that manually. And we had them automatize all of this using algorithms. And here the challenge was, I think, not purely in exactly, finding the most sophisticated forecasting algorithms, although it can be a little bit important, but what's more important is really how to combine internal data with external data, and also, appropriately capture what matters for the forecast in the end. So, and I think the main benefits here were, okay, the forecasts are now a little bit more accurate than they used to be, but it's mostly in the automation and systematic planning that this enables. Around still this topic of forecasting, because we saw it several times for several customers, we actually, over time, we decided to sort of create our own technology around this. So we built a Python library which is called Darts. Initially, we built it for ourselves only. So we just we did it as a collection of algorithms. So with Darts, you can use simple algorithms for forecasting, but you can also use deep learning, for example, for forecasting. You can do that quite easily. And at some point we thought, okay, it's actually very useful. Probably it's useful also for others. So we could just maybe also open source it. So it's actually open source. So if you are a technical person and you are interested in time series forecasting, don't hesitate to check it out on GitHub.
And
yeah, so I give you back the mic, Andreas.
Like to take over again and discuss briefly some of the common challenges that AI practitioners often face in an industry context. So challenge number one is the data quality, because if the data is not available at a high enough quality, and then there is maybe suboptimal, very old IT systems, then that can often be a roadblocker, because data really is at the heart of AI adoption. While also inflated expectations are sometimes a challenge, because typically it will take some time to generate that ROI on AI use cases. And it all depends a bit on the situation on the ground that needs to be taken into account. Also, what we see that manufacturing companies often struggle with hiring the right, finding and hiring and keeping the right AI talent, because data scientists are very strongly in need these days. And of course, many of them naturally tend to join some of the large tech players like Google, etc. So if you're more like in the manufacturing chemicals domain, you should think about how to provide an attractive environment to your data scientists. And then, of course, it's also about the availability of the cloud, because there you have essentially unlimited compute and storage power that can be deployed at very short notice. And some companies, they are not yet in the cloud. I would even argue that well, probably the vast majority of companies is not yet using the cloud for the data and AI applications, which can sometimes be a challenge. I'm not saying it's not possible to do it on premises, but it helps and can speed up things if you leverage the cloud. Now, what are some kind of key recommendations to succeed with data and AI in the chemicals industry and also in other industries? So in order to succeed, I think at first it's important to position yourself on the stage of the data and AI journey that you are in. So now here you have 4 stages that we typically see with our clients. Stage 1 is strategize and ideate, where you're really at the beginning stage. You think about the use cases, about what's possible with AI. Stage 2 is when you already started to experiment. You might have the first proof of concepts and prototypes. Stage 3 is when you start to scale up your AI practice and roll it out across the whole organization and set up infrastructure and platforms. And then stage 4 is really where you professionalize your AI practice it's topics such as ML ops and governance, which are important there. Also the establishment of the AI Center of Excellence. Now, maybe you can just take a moment and think about where you are positioned in that stage, because obviously the requirements are quite different. And I would now like to zoom in a bit on that stage one, when it's really about getting started with your initial AI projects. We think it's important that you dream big, but then, yes, have that big vision. That's perfectly fine. But in order to get the ball rolling, it's important to start. And it's always easiest to start if you just start small, even with a small proof of concept, because that is allowing you to gain experience and build momentum for AI within your organization. You will also be able to achieve initial results, and you can have proof points to then convince other stakeholders to further invest into AI and implement more use cases. This will also help you to establish a foundation for scaling a potential AI practice. I would now like to conclude with some quick lessons learned that we gathered in more than 50 AI projects since 2017, when Unit 8 was established. Number one is really focus on the quick wins in the beginning, because there you have some high chances of success, which I commented on earlier. You can build the momentum. That ties in with the pilots. They are also important for proving that value and convincing stakeholders. And then you should really focus on adding business value. So think about all the things that AI can do. Think about all the things that have value for your business, and then take the intersection of these two areas. Also recommend having a pragmatic approach. Don't spend months and years to deploy the perfect machine learning model. It's better to have a slightly imperfect model in production than striving for the perfect model which never gets deployed. And last but not least, communication is extremely important. So establishing AI in an organization has a lot to do with getting the momentum across the whole organization, also communicating that in a way it's also a change management topic if you want to become an AI first company. So that's why this is important. Now, I think, yeah, just like some concluding words. You'll find us on the internet. We are on also on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on Twitter. You can follow us. Please follow us. You will receive all the updates on the next talks. And yeah, well, now I think I'd like to open the Q&A. You have also our email addresses here. So if you have any questions or you have any kind of problems in your organization with AI, feel free to reach out to either of us.
Perfect. Thanks, Andreas. Thanks, Julian, for driving the session. I'm looking at the Q&A panel, and I think there's a relatively generic but yet important question that was asked during the session, Julian, when you covered the R&D side. So do you actually I mean, you've shown the examples of how AI is going to be changing the R&D process in the chemical industry. Do you actually foresee that AI will replace the specialists, the subject matter expert and professionals in doing the chemical molecules and so on?
Yeah, I don't have a crystal ball to really answer completely, but I think here what we observe is that AI is taking really more of a role of augmenting the human and allowing the human to iterate faster and explore more of the space of what's possible, right? I don't think we are anywhere where, you know, the algorithm would just replace the human. I think it's just increasing the quality of the products and the speed, delivery speed.
Perfect. And Julian, you've taken us on a little bit of a journey what's the impact of AI in R&D, in production, in sales and distribution. I think there's a question as well that in one of the box there were some questions. In one of the boxes that Andreas was showing, there was the AI use cases in the environment and the sustainability. Are you able to comment on how AI can actually help maybe in the topic of sustainability?
Yeah. Here, I think it can really help. I touched a little bit on this one. So I think this can, whenever we do, optimization of the products that we make using machine learning, we can factor in explicitly the renewability criteria like into the objective that we're trying to optimize with the model. So, for example, for the formulation exercise, we can try to maximize the proportion of renewable ingredients in there, but also for molecule design. If we have models capable of capturing what's the impact, if the molecule might have a negative impact on the environment, that we try to detect this early, earlier rather than later.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Let's say for the answer. I'm not seeing any other questions in our Q&A panel. Therefore, if there are any other remaining questions from our audience, please please do reach out. Julian, Andreas, as we wait for the last questions, any closing recommendations, any closing thoughts?
Well, I could just say, please go on our website, unit8.co. There you will also have a summary of these case studies, and it will be constantly updated. And yeah, we hope we could show you the really impressive potentials of AI in chemicals. And we hope we could also spark an interest that helps you to get started on your AI journey within the organizations that you work in.
Perfect. Well, with that, thank you to Andreas and Julian for walking us through to the kind of state of the union of AI in the chemical industry. Thanks for the diversity of the kind of case studies and applications within the industry.
We raised hand. Maybe I'm reading wrong, but I think someone raised hand. Isabel?
Yes, I did ask in the chat if that's a question, but I unfortunately did not get the answer. So so I think we can start concluding. And if anyone has a follow-up question to Andreas and Julien, you have the email addresses. So I wanted to say a very big thank you to the audience as well for spending a part of the afternoon with us. Feel free to reach out if we could be of help, and stay tuned as well for more updates on some of the topics that we've mentioned today. Have a lovely evening. This was Unit8 Talks. The next session is scheduled for late April, and the information about the upcoming webinars will be on our social media and on our website. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.